Hello everyone, and welcome to the Painting Paladin. My name is Justin, and in today's episode, we are going to be working on something a little unique. Now recently, I've wanted to work on something other than just game piece miniatures, so I decided to make some home decor. Now I had a hint of inspiration for something from a piece of fantasy artwork I had seen, so I just had to fine tune the idea. In the end, I came up with the perfect piece to hang in my office, a recovered object that was discovered in the personal collection of a fantasy creature collector, a preserved tooth fairy. Now to start this project, I bought this 9x9 shadow box from my local craft store. Next was making the monster, and for this, I designed the creature on Heroforge and downloaded and enlarged the file. Now the creature by itself would have been kind of boring, so I decided to download some teeth and some coins to add to the display. And lastly, I made a journal entry to describe the creature to give it some fluff and kind of feel like it was a piece of archive work. So with that all being said, let's head to the work desk and get started on putting this together, shall we? Alright, now before we begin, I undercoated this model with Wraithbone spray. Now the first thing we're going to do is actually apply a wash to the model. And the color we're using for this is Reikland Fleshshade. So just take your time when applying this and watch for any pooling. But if you do get pools, just use the tip of your brush to soak them up. With that wash dried, we can move on to the next step. Now the next color that we're going to be using is Wraithbone again, but this time we're going to be applying it as a dry brush. Now if you're not familiar with dry brushing, it's a technique where you dip your brush into the paint, wipe most of it off onto a paper towel, and then lightly brush it over the surface of the model, catching only the raised areas. Next, we're going to paint the wings, and the color we're using for this is Stormhost Silver. The next thing that we're going to do is paint the wings again, and we're going to use a contrast paint for this. However, it's your choice on what color contrast paint you want to use for your tooth fairy. Alright, so the contrast paint I chose for my tooth fairy is Iyanden Yellow. So we're just going to apply this all over the wings. With that Iyanden Yellow drying, I took a minute and painted another tooth fairy, but this time I used Blood Angel's Red, just so you could see an example of another color being used. Moving on, the next color that we're going to be using is Abaddon Black, and that's to paint the eyes as well as the outer parts of the wings, and I took the time to add some small detail work on the wings just to give it some more character. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is paint the Tooth Fairy's teeth, and the color we're using for this is Xandri Dust. Next, I used some gloss varnish and painted that over the eyeballs just to give them a shine. With that gloss varnish applied, painting the model is finished and we can move on to the next step, and that's going to be drilling the holes for the pins in his body. Now for this, I drilled holes in the uppermost part of the upper wings, through the palms of its hands, and the lowest part of the lower wings. Alright, with those holes drilled, we can move on to the next part of this project, and that's going to be painting the copper coins. Now, I preemptively sprayed the coins with Retributor Armor, but the first color we're actually going to use to paint them is Balthasar Gold. Next, we're going to give the coins an all-over wash using Reikland Fleshshade. With that wash dried, these coins are finished. Now the reason we're not doing anything else to them is because I want them to look dull and lackluster, like they've been on display for a while. The next thing we're going to be working on is the teeth that are also on display with the Tooth Fairy. Now I sprayed these with Wraithbone spray, and the first color that we're actually going to be using though is Seraphim Sepia. Now we're going to be painting this into the recesses and along the top of the teeth, as well as on the sides to make it look like it has some yellowing, plaque, and tartar. The next thing that we're going to be doing is painting some dried blood effects on the sides and bottom of the teeth. Now the color we're using for this is actually a mix of 2 parts Mephiston Red and 1 part Rhinox Hide. So just mix these together and paint them along the base of the teeth. With that done, these nasty little children's teeth are finished. And the next thing we need to do is make a bag to put them in. Now to make the bag for the teeth, it's actually quite easy and you only need 3 things: a needle, some golden thread, and a mesh tulle type material. So the first step is cut a small section of your golden thread, probably about 6 to 8 inches, and on one end of the string, tie it off with a knot. Then, using the other end of the string, run it through the hole of the needle, leaving about 2 inches on the other side. Then, you're going to fold your mesh-like material in half and take the needle that you just threaded and start sewing or zigzagging your way from the bottom side, or the side that's got the fold, all the way up to about 7/8 the way up. Now when you reach this point, you're going to take the needle off the thread and tie the thread off at the top area there. Next, you're just going to repeat this on the other side. After you've finished stitching both the sides up, the next thing you're going to do is turn the bag inside out so that both the stitchings are on the inside of the bag. Once that bag is turned inside out, you're going to take another section of thread about 6 inches, tying it off on one end and leaving yourself about 2 inches on the other side after you've threaded the needle, and then work your way around the top part of the bag. Now you're not going to stitch both sides together. You're only going to do it on one side and then cross over to the other side as one continuous piece of thread. Now when you get to the other side, then what you're going to do after you reach the end there is take your needle off and tie it off just like your beginning piece. With that done, the bag of teeth is finished and we can move on to the next part. Now for the fluff or flavor text, I just typed it out onto a Google Doc and then changed the size and the font. Now the font I chose was Dancing Script Bold. Now the next thing I did after I printed out my Google Doc was made some tea. Now when I say that, I mean I used a bowl of hot water, added a tea bag in it and let it steep until the water was nice and dark, and then used a paper towel and gently smeared some of that tea water onto the paper so that it would discolor it as well as wrinkle it up just a little. Make sure when you're doing this to give it plenty of time to dry and that it's on a flat surface so that it doesn't get any strange kinks or bends in it. Once it was dry, all I had to do was cut out the different pieces and trim them up to the right size. Now all that's left with this project is assembling everything together. Now for the copper coins, I used super glue and glued them to the backing piece there, but everything else I pinned using needles. Now for the tooth fairy, I had the 6 holes that I had previously drilled, but I had also used 2 more pins to pin the inside of his legs to make it look like it was intentionally spread out that way. Then I used a pin in the top of the bag of teeth to keep that in place, and 4 pins, 1 in each corner, on the big sheet of paper. Now for the small pieces of paper, I just used a pin on the left and right side to keep them in place. Alright, with everything glued on, pinned down, and assembled, this piece is ready to be hung in the office. Now a few things to remember when working on a project like this. The first is to plan it out. If you don't have a plan, then things might not go the right way, and you might end up wasting time, money, or both. The next is, as always, take your time to avoid any mistakes. But if you make any mistakes, you can always go back to your previous colors and correct them. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you want to stay up to date with future videos, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Thanks everyone.